Welcome everyone. We are really excited to be here today and doing this webinar with all of you. I'm joined here by Travis Howerton of RegScale. RegScale, of course, is one of our innovators, and we're really excited to be talking to you today. Um, we're gonna do kind of a back and forth informal conversational style, but we'll certainly be opening it up to all of you at the end for any types of questions that you might have. But really, we want to talk a bit about the regulatory landscape and compliance as code and some of the things that RegScale is doing on for the benefit of CRI. Travis, I'm just gonna kick it off to you. I know that you had a few introductory remarks and we can just kind of start asking each other questions.
Yeah, so I just say Travis Howerton, co-founder, CEO here at RegScale. I'm a longtime national security guy. So spent 20 years doing national security work for the U.S. Retired as the first chief technology officer of the U.S. nuclear weapons program, where I got to run one of the biggest risk and compliance programs in the world for all the reasons you would want it to be with weapons that can end the world. And so I got to experience sort of firsthand some of the challenges at scale of trying to manage in that type of environment. We set out to automate some things that make it easier, and that's where we kind of ran into OSCAL and compliance as code. And along the journey, CRI seemed like they were full of innovative people with a similar mindset, and that's kind of how we got to here. So excited to share a little bit about what we're working on, why it matters, and hopefully how it can make your life a little better.
Great. And Travis, I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction of RegScale as a company, summary as to what their mission is and what they do.
Sure. So RegScale is, I like to think of it as sort of a next generation cyber GRC tool that's really focused on being an operational risk tool for the CISO. So trying to help organizations move beyond checklist-based approaches to risk and compliance to more real-time proactive approaches that allow you to get secure faster. So get through the wickets you need to get new technology into production in your institutions, to do it more cost effectively, and to do it without so much delays related to people. And at the end of the day, if you're doing the work, we want the work to go into actually driving real world security outcomes, which is a big part of what you're going to hear today is our differentiations really around compliance as code and AI and just thinking about the problem in a fundamentally different way. So we do the same things that GRC tools have done since the beginning of the industry. We just do them in a wildly different way. And we'll talk a little bit about why that might matter to you, whether you're looking at RegScale or any other tool that might support these standards. The techniques and the philosophy will apply all the same.
And you use the term compliance as code, and for many they're familiar with the term, but there are those that aren't. So I was wondering if you might be able to just kind of explain what compliance as code means and how does it differ from traditional compliance practices in financial services.
Yeah, so there's sort of a couple of problems we kind of saw happening. I'm an old cyber guy, and every time something would change, you would end up in this massive copy paste exercise. I've got to read it, I've got to copy and paste to Excel or some other document and move stuff around and figure out how it impacts me. And it's a very manual, labor intense, nonstop process, and you're going to be audited, so it needs to be right. And so it becomes sort of a painful experience for everybody. We just thought with the rise of cloud and ephemeral systems that traditional approaches to clients just weren't going to, or to compliance and risk just weren't going to work anymore. Because you could kind of do it in the old static client server world where things don't change that much. And we can sort of document what we're doing, lock it down, put some configuration management around it, we'll be fine. It doesn't work at all when systems are dynamic. They spin up and down on demand. You're trying to hit a moving target. And so we thought the industry was going to have to change. And that's really where compliance as code comes in. Been involved for the early days with the NIST team, Michaela, Dr. Walter Meyer, over there for OSCAL, what became the Open Security Controls Assessment Language, which you can think of as just a machine readable way to represent all your compliance and risk programs. So they've built models in JSON, XML, YAML that now I can, instead of pulling it from a government website or a PDF or some poor person's spreadsheet they've been maintaining for 20 years, we could pull it the same way we pull code, right? So I can go in GitHub today, pull the latest code down, be up and working right away. I can't do that at all in my risk and compliance program. So we thought if you could pull your control inventory, your policies, all those things in the same way, then it could feed your automation ecosystem, your CI/CD pipelines when you're building software, your Terraform scripts, your lockdown hardening scripts in your production environment. You'd be able to read all of those things. And then increasingly, we started with OSCAL, but today the world is much more complex in compliance as code. There are things like software bill of materials or SBOM, which is another machine readable sort of risk and compliance artifact. You might have heard of
Mhm.
OCSF, the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, which is a Linux Foundation project for security data. So there are more and more ways to represent these complex dynamic environments as code. And because they can be represented as code, you can drive a lot more automation than you can the traditional manual processes.
And are there any misconceptions that are kind of out there currently as to what compliance as code is and does?
Yeah, there's probably several misconceptions, I would say. The first of which is, people just look at it and go, "What do I do with that?" I'm used to reading this PDF and I kind of know how to run that through. Why are you sending me this thing with a bunch of crazy markup? As a human, I don't know what to do with that. And so I think one of the misconceptions is that it's sort of a science project. I view it more as sort of superpowering your tooling under the hood. And so I think being able to plug into bridge that gap between the risk and compliance team and your DevSecOps app dev teams, I think can be a really powerful thing. And I think the as code piece is part of it. So I don't see it as a science project today. It probably was in 2015
Mhm.
when I think the NIST folks first started thinking about this and pushing in that direction. But I think these types of approaches are much more mainstream today. In 2015, everybody was manually creating servers and pushing those things by hand with people. Today, everybody does that with Terraform scripts or some other sort of tool. And so I think it's just part of that Mark Andreessen philosophy that software is going to eat the world. I think this is part of the world software is now eating. That compliance as code can just provide a much better foundation. The other misconception I hear a lot is we don't need this anymore. This was good for automation, but now AI is just going to solve everything. And so we don't have to worry about the compliance as code stuff anymore. The thing I would say to folks like that is I view them as perfectly paired. Like it's not one or the other. AI is very good at being generally right, very fast most of the time, which is good in many domains. It's horrible in the security domain. Being kind of right doesn't cut it. You got to be right all the time. An attacker's only got to be right once, right? And so it's one of those things that the precision's just not there. But if you combine compliance as code technologies, which are highly precise, and you train your models on highly precise and consistent data, then your AI models and predictions will get highly precise as well. So I view them as very complementary tools to one
Mhm.
another, not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and we've actually seen, and maybe we'll get to talk about this a little bit later. One of our members has actually combined the two, where an AI agent sits on top of an OSCAL version of something
Mm-hmm.
that we've been working on.
Yep.
Um, but one of the things that I also wanted to ask is, and you touched upon it a little bit, there's some real benefits to using machine readable formats. And I was wondering if you could kind of articulate them a bit for folks here as well.
Yeah. So just a handful of the key benefits to me. One is just eliminating the manual copy and paste that we all deal with and trying to get our arms around regulatory change management. When you think about what it's like to be a software developer, and I know probably many people here aren't software developers, but when I pull code, we have multiple people doing things in real time, and we can use as code paradigms to just kind of keep everything nicely in sync. So I think that analog for how we do that in software development can be a very nice analog about how you keep your risk, compliance, and audit teams kind of all in sync off the same sheet of paper, even though all of them may be changing in different ways. So I think that's sort of one of the benefits is keeping people in sync and getting out of the manual. The second is they're machine readable. So what it means is your tooling and your pipelines, your tooling and all the different tools that you have can now read that precisely and can always pull from latest. So if you change your password policy, you change some other thing, if they're all pulling from a source of truth that is compliance as code, as soon as that's updated, all your job downstream now become pretty rapidly updated versus the traditional way that we did it in math past life, which is you get a new mandate. Now I need a corrective action plan. We got to go spend months going to roll this stuff out by hand. There's just much easier, more modern approaches to how you do it today. So I think that's the second one. And then the third is how you think about audits. And so, Josh, you were mentioning you have one of the CRI customers. They're doing things with AI and compliance as code. We see it the same way. We start with we pull compliance as code. We then enable automation and integrations and APIs. We have AI agents that do things, and we have people that do things. And then we end with compliance as code as well. So you can publish out sort of your assessment report or audit in as real time as you want, and then get it all in machine readable, look at what's happening, do your analytics, dashboarding, predictive, whatever things you may want to do, and continue to train and improve those AI models based off the results of the output. So you sort of got this strong loop that happens where you've got compliance as code, strongly formatted, AI acting on it, human in the loop feedback mechanisms that then improve it. And you get sort of this continuous improvement, virtuous cycle that happens where the AI can continue to get better and better because of its compliance as code foundation.
Well, thank you, Travis. And we're going to shift gears a little bit. And one of the things that when we were discussing, this webinar was whether or not I might be willing to talk about the regulatory landscape and government shutdown. And one of the questions that came up in our discussion was, well, what does the government shutdown really mean for compliance and compliance as code? And you know, the the answer is a little bit nuanced in a sense. So with the financial services sector, for instance, um, most are regulated by independent regulatory agencies, of which receive separate funding from all the different bank fees, financial institution fees that go into those agencies. So the exams are currently ongoing. It's not like the situation in high school where if your teacher wasn't there for 5 minutes, you could kind of leave class. Exams are still ongoing. The government shutdown hasn't impacted that. So compliance as code is still very much, and compliance generally is still very much at the fore of what the independent regulatory agencies are carrying forth with. Now, on a macro level, the way that I kind of see the regulatory landscape is it's almost like a balloon. And so if the US federal government starts to take a back seat in terms of regulation or legislation, et cetera, it could be either foreign governments or the states themselves. It's almost like you're squeezing down. You'll start to see more action there, right? And so we are starting to see a lot more action, either in the international fronts as it relates to cyber, certainly AI, and at the state level. So if anything, that kind of really necessitates kind of this thinking of we always have to be compliance ready. And it may be that, the traditional regulators may not be the ones pushing forth the most regulation. It might be some of these other ones that have been more secondary in terms of your consideration. But to the extent that you're subject to them because you're in their jurisdiction, we do anticipate them kind of ramping up because we're starting to see signals for that. Um, one of the other pieces people asked us about as it relates to cyber in particular and the regulatory landscape is, okay, for the past, I think it was about 10 years or so, actually it was a little less, we've had in place the Cyber Information Sharing Act, which allowed for firms to share cyber threat information, indicators, et cetera, to each other in the government. And there were a whole host of liability protections around that. Of course, that's lapsed. We're in a shutdown. There had been some talk about trying to get some provisions in, various bills. That doesn't seem to be proceeding anytime soon. So we've had a lot of questions about what are the implications of this. Well, one of the things that I would just say is financial services has always been great at information sharing, particular cyber threat indicator information sharing. And we've had our Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the FSISAC, around even before this legislation occurred. And so, we fully anticipate that to continue. Now, there may be other industries, et cetera, where they might fall back on, well, we don't have this and we aren't going to share. But that is why our trade associations, the Bank Policy Institute, the American Bankers Association, SIFMA, et cetera, have all been pushing for renewal. And so one of the main obstacles, aside from the shutdown, is um, uh, one of the committee chairs, Rand Paul of Kentucky, has wanted to include some stuff into the bill that is not necessarily making it easier to pass. So to the extent there are folks from Kentucky, feel free to encourage him to pass that legislation. Um, One of the other questions just on that regulatory front was, what does the regulatory oversight look like? Um, uh, what role can compliance as code play in maintaining continuity in a shifting environment? Um, and this just comes back to less about the government shutdown, but more about kind of the general philosophy that we're seeing within the U.S. federal government generally under the Trump administration. They are less apt to be moving forward with various enforcement procedures. They're going to be much more selective in terms of what they move forward on. Um, but that doesn't mean that they aren't going to. And one of the ways that, compliance as code can be assisting is, I think they're given kind of all the cuts within the federal government generally and the reductions in force. Um, what do people do? They do what's expedient. And so if you're faced with a larger caseload, as an enforcer, you're going to look to see, well, I can't look through and do like a fully comprehensive audit, but if they have something like compliance as code running and they can explain it and can explain how they're doing some oversight, there's going to be a level of credibility and trust that they will look at you for. And so what you may start to see is um, that scrutiny will be more placed on those that have ad hoc processes, firms that have those, as opposed to automation or clearly cataloged and demonstrable processes in place. And then, one of the things that we were talking about a little bit earlier, you mentioned was OSCAL, and I want you to kind of talk a little bit more about OSCAL. I know that you serve on the board of the OSCAL Foundation, and uh, I was wondering if you might be able to talk about what is OSCAL and uh, what is the Foundation?
Yeah. So OSCAL stands for the Open Security Controls Assessment Language. It's again a set of machine readable artifacts that represent all aspects of a risk and compliance program, starting with the catalog, which is essentially a regulation, profiles, which are one or more regulations that are combined into some sort of logical unit. We would call those baselines or overlays back in my old days. They then get applied to some sort of system or boundary that needs to be hardened to that standard. Then you have your assessment layer underneath it, your assessment results. So what happens when I go out and do the audit? And then the issues or POAMs layer underneath that. And so basically all of those things have machine readable representation. It's a hierarchical structure where they all flow one to the other with complete traceability. So it gives you sort of, from a computer science perspective, really fine-grained control to model, mark up, and describe every aspect of what you're doing in risk and compliance, and to tie it all together in unique ways. The OSCAL came out of NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. Michaela Orga, David Waltermeyer, and some others were sort of the giants at NIST who came up with this model. But what they were getting pushed from industry and from government customers was, we just can't keep up anymore. We don't have enough people. Everything's getting modernized. It's going faster and faster. This approach we have taken as an industry just doesn't scale. And so can you at NIST as a standards body come up with a methodology and a standard that's built to scale, that's more cloud native, that requires less human resources to execute? As it's become adopted more and more, NIST is working with the OSCAL Foundation, which is, I believe, a 503c nonprofit, with the goal of sort of internationalizing the standard, getting broader adoption, bringing more industry collaboration on how you put it into practice. There's a lot of things that happen in the foundation, from evangelizing to educating, to industry collaboration on evolving the standard itself into new areas to add more value. And so there's lots of ways to get plugged into OSCAL. And to sort of piggyback on Josh's comments on the regulatory environment, regardless of sort of what happens with government shutdown, we're moving into a world where we're going to have to be more fiscally responsible. Like the deficit's not sustainable. So if you just forecast out, there's going to have to be reductions in what we spend. And so dollars are going to be harder to come by. OSCAL is one of those areas that's a nice fit where you could take something that wasn't doing a great job in actual real world security in terms of manual checks, automate it, and get a cost reduction at the same time. So you get sort of the dual win of better security and lower cost. And then the other thing I tell people, just being an old Fed guy myself, is if you look at regulations, the honest answer is there's two kinds. There's the ones that you do because you have to, right? You don't see a bottom line business benefit. You may not be able to draw a straight line to a risk reduction, but at the end of the day, your regulator is saying jump, and you got to jump. And so it forces you to do certain things. When it comes to compliance as code, it's really tied in real world security outcomes, which I'm going to argue, whether you were regulated or not, it's still a good thing when it comes to protecting your organization from undue risk and putting yourself in a good posture. It just gives you a much more stable, defensible foundation.
Well, thank you for that, Travis. And just kind of talking about OSCAL a little bit and turning it selfishly toward CRI. One of the things that we've been doing, and this is how we were introduced, was how do we take the CRI profile and, for lack of a better term, OSCALify it, get
Yep.
it into an OSCAL version and standardize. And you guys graciously came along and said, "Hey, we live and breathe OSCAL. We will help you do that and donate it and for the good of the community and so forth." And so for the past few months, we've had a working group, and you guys have been a large part of the muscle behind OSCALifying the profile. And we're pretty much almost there. We did get some comments through the working group that we're going to be working through. But I think pretty soon we should be able to make some announcements about the contributions from the working group and reg scale on a CRI profile version in OSCAL. And I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about what you see some of the benefits of that being, not only for reg scale, but the larger community and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of several things. I'll kind of go through the history lesson of how we got to here as well, which is, we're a commercial company. We had a financial services institution who needed CRI, and so that was my first introduction to it, and getting to know Josh and the team along the way. But they were using CRI as sort of their playbook for how they do compliance, and so we set out to digitize it. As we got to know the CRI team, they were very interested in thought leaders in compliance as code. Their membership, I guess, was probably pushing you to figure out ways to drive more automation and more value. And they really stepped into a leadership sort of vacuum that existed with sort of FedRAMP moving a little bit away from OSCAL, but CRI has really leaned in pretty hard with their community of, hey, we got a real world use case and we can solve problems with this. And so we were able to take the CRI and all the mappings for an older version of the CRI, it was current one at the time, but older today, and get that completely in OSCAL. So that was something we did at no cost, provided out to the community to try to seed the market with sort of the art of the possible and then work with them to help educate. From there, they've evolved the CRI further. It's got more things it supports. They're not standing still, and so they moved it further. The problem we have when we did version 1, we put it in OSCAL, and the schema was flexible enough for us to describe the mappings, but I would describe mappings as a second-class citizen in that version of OSCAL. One of the things the foundation does, though, is work with industry on what are the problems and gaps in OSCAL. So the first project we chose to tackle with CRI and the foundations, we said, we're going to build out the mappings framework. We're going to move it from a second-class citizen to a first class with well-defined properties, easy to parse, all those sorts of things. And we got that, the latest version of CRI in the latest version with the mappings extension as sort of, world first, plant a flag and say we did it together. That's almost ready to release. The awesome thing about working with CRI is the community is super smart. And so we put some of our best ideas on it, put it together, but some of the community under Josh also had even better ideas. So we're going to continue to enrich it, to make it better. And you'll see a release coming out very soon that I think will be a great step forward beyond the first iteration. So you're just seeing that continuous improvement working together. And so very exciting to be part of that.
Well, we really do thank you, and thank you for stepping up, and then also the OSCAL Foundation for listening to CRI and the community to say mappings aren't the second class citizen. They're very important because that's exactly what we have to do is take some standardized approach and use it as a translation mechanism to other things that are running.
Just double click on that one because I think you asked a bit about benefit. So I got into the sort of the what we did. And I talked a bit earlier about sort of automation and AI and what all you can automate. All those are great ways to reduce labor, but the best way I know to reduce labor is to make things go away. And what mappings do is they make things go away. I've already done this. This is equivalent to what this other standard B, C, and D need. Rather than reinvent the wheel, do the work, I can leverage the power of CRI and its mappings to make huge swaths of work go away. And by the way, the regulators support it because of all the work Josh and team have done with this community. And so that's the sort of step one, is like make work go away. And then for the real work that's left, let's go automate it together. Right. So that's really the benefit of getting the mappings there. They're machine readable, so you make the work go away, and now you can take that machine readable, pass it down, and start automating off of it.
Yeah. And I know that, you have contracts and are under NDAs and the like, so I won't get into any of the specifics of where you've seen OSCAL be of benefit to some of the firms. But, as I mentioned earlier, one of the cool things that we saw was uh, when one of our members uh, basically OSCALified the profile and then added a AI agent on top and was able to query it with plain language. How many of our devices are out of compliance with New York DFS, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And it returned, a number. So like that to us was very powerful. And I don't know if there are other anecdotes you can share, or if the contracts and NDAs kind of preclude it, but that's why we're just bullish on automation generally too.
Yep. And I'd say a couple things, and I'm going to avoid making any sort of sales pitch. One of the nice things that about OSCAL is this isn't a reg scale or even a CRI innovation. It's an open standard, right? And so anyone who adopts OSCAL, you could use any tool, you can move between tools, but you would be on a solid open standards foundation, which is powerful. And building on top of that is pretty limitless. We built our first fleet of AI agents. We've got 5 or 6 now. They do everything from develop documentation for
Mhm.
all the stuff you got to write to get an application into prod, to doing your audit of that. So same thing, take your OSCAL output, be able to overlay it over the top, do a complete audit end to end, and write an assessment report you can send to your risk team to see if that's something they are comfortable authorizing into production or not. All these things can be automated as a function of time. And having that compliance as code foundation just means it's going to be a much more precise automation. And so we see people doing various things there, but it basically starts as code and then it ends as code with the way we think of it as reg scale. You pull your controls, you do your work, whether it's human based, automation based, or AI based. At the end, you publish out your OSCAL, and sort of you begin and end with code on both sides.
Great. And so we have a few more questions, which we could get to, but I wanted to maybe turn and pivot and see if anyone from the audience had any questions. And feel free to put them in the chat. But and you can even think about them. I'll ask you another one, Travis, while we wait to see if anyone's got any questions, just generally. Um, so how would you characterize what it is that you're doing, we're doing, OSCAL? How does that fit into a broader GRC strategy?
Yeah. So for us, we think of it as the foundational piece of a next gen GRC versus something that's bolted on. We built our entire platform based off OSCAL, thinking that this is the way the world needs to go. And so we're as all in gets. But the idea is you should be able to go through that publishing RMF workflow and get to consistent low risk authorization decisions and a very auditable, defensible compliance posture by following the OSCAL schema end to end. And so we think it's just the NIST team we've kind of stood on the shoulder of giants here. The NIST team did a great job really thinking through the problem, working with the community on how you put it together. I also think it was the first NIST project that was sort of developed open source in the public domain. So they shared their work. You had industry people submitting pull requests to basically enhance it and work through it. So it was a very innovative, even within a fairly innovative research and standards organization in NIST, very innovative project in how it was executed. And I think it's just the computer science brilliance of it kind of speaks for itself, from my perspective. And then it's just the clever part for us was just as a GRC tool vendor, and we're not the only ones using OSCAL, by the way. There's multiple tool vendors, but I think the innovation is really happening on now that we have this foundation. What can you do with it? And
Mhm.
so that's where the creative side comes in. Sort of how do you package the solution? How do you leverage AI? How do you leverage automation? How do you supercharge your humans using this kind of technology? And so that's where the creativity comes into play. And the cool part, and sort of my stump speech, almost anytime you hear me talk, I'm an old guy. I grew up when there was no hope. I spent 20 years where there was no hope. Like the only way to do it was copy, paste, huge documents. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to read and write, but it's the only way to get to the other
Give it
side.
to an
Right.
intern.
Yep. And now there's hope. Like I think technology's evolved, standards have evolved, organizations like CRI exist,
Mhm.
where that this is now a solvable problem. It may not be a fully solved problem yet, but it is now a solvable problem. And so it's exciting to be part of it.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I see a hand up from Paul Leonhardt of Palo Alto Networks. Paul?
Hi, Josh. Just posted a question there in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Oh, yes. Okay. Aside from OSCAL and CIC, which we are all working with, how about the underlying evidence from the actual security operations platforms and data?
Mhm.
What APIs are needed for GRC vendors and or links to bank internal dashboards to move off reliance of static RCSAs feeding XLS spreadsheets? It's a great question,
Yeah.
or bundled question, I should say.
So I'm going to give you an opinionated answer, Paul, and I'll caveat it by saying this is probably not the only way to do it, but it's the reg scale way. What we started with is this compliance as code foundation. Almost no functional person wants to be inside of JSON files doing manual edits. They want software, right? And so there's a UX translation layer. But the way we think about it is every time a human has to log into a web portal to manually update something, we failed, right? So the real answer is tools like Palo Alto, like Qualys, like Wiz, pick your stack at your financial services
Mhm.
institution. All those tools have a ton of telemetry and they're best in class. And you've probably spent years or even decades tuning those things very precisely to your needs. Our thesis is let's expose all that OSCAL schema and thousands of APIs in a graph and an SDK on our side. So now that the tool vendors can just pipe the data they already have, the paperwork updates itself, the AI helps you make sense of it, react to it, workflow it, those sorts of things. And so that's been our approach to it. Not saying it's the right approach. There's other people who do it different ways, and they may have more or less value than we do it to you. But that's the opinionated way that we thought about it. Was basically it starts with every time a human has to go to a keyboard and type something themselves, we fail. What can we infer? What can we let AI do? What do we already know from the tooling they already have? So it's trying to make the investments they have more valuable by unlocking that data and allowing it to do things that historically could only be done with humans.
Yep. And we have some commentary from Paul on the chat, which is sometimes there's the security operations teams, and they're a little bit reluctant to give the second line of defense, the IT risk folks, direct access to live controls data. Obviously, we are a membership organization where we have a lot of the cross-functional executives. So I won't opine on on that either way. But you know, Travis, do you have any olive branches, perhaps, that RegScale is providing between the two lines of defense?
I have some thoughts on it. Like some of this is cultural, right? And so you're going to see a cultural shift. And I'm old enough to remember when all my CISO buddies said there's no such thing as cloud. It's just somebody else's computer. And they wore the t-shirts and I'll never put my workloads in the cloud. And you're crazy. And every one of them lives in the cloud 2025, like every single one of them. Right. And so like the reality is the world's got to move in this kind of direction. I sort of say two things to it. One, we have a culture of like it's not quite in great shape. So I worked for an old general, and I'm going to use his analogy, so I can't take credit for it. But he described audits as a mother-in-law visit, and he said every time she comes over, we clean the house to a ridiculous standard. We all pretend like we live this way, and then it falls into immediate disrepair when they leave. I
Mhm.
think the upside of compliance as code is your house can always look that way, right? And it takes very little effort to keep it in that shape because it's driven by automation. So I think if you can get into a posture where your house is always clean, then I think that transparency creates trust with second and third line because you're not hiding anything from them. It's not a gotcha game. It's like our house is always clean. Come over anytime you want, and we're happy to show you around. So that analogy stuck with me. There's probably a better, more appropriate one, but that's the one that has stuck with me for the last 20 years.
Well, we have another series of questions from Matt Gallus, and his question is in the chat, and it's knowing RegScale is focused and built around OSCAL is great, but we need the adoption of that to grow across the industry, which is, of course, one of the missions of the OSCAL Foundation. And that's inclusive of GRC tools like RegScale, but more importantly, with all the tools and vendors, the entire stack, as you just mentioned, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to report and export OSCAL files. What adoption are you actually seeing from those tools?
So I'd say two things. One, part of why we come to webinars with CRI, we're part of OSCAL Foundation, is to evangelize and help with adoption. So people can adopt things they don't understand and see the benefits of. So part of it's education, awareness, those sorts of things. At the end of the day, people voting with their wallet will help. Like I'm a product guy. The government says, hey, we're not doing anything in GRC space that's not OSCAL native, and they put it in the FAR. Guess what? Every GRC tool on the planet will adopt it overnight.
Yep.
So like voting with your wallet helps. I can't help on that. I'm just a dirty little contractor. But for folks with big budgets who spend on this stuff, that's how you get industry to adopt. The third mechanism, the one that's getting the most adoption or where we've made the most progress, is we haven't tried to push OSCAL on people. What we've tried to do is meet them where they are. And so one of the ones I mentioned is the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, OCSF. Much of industry has started to adopt the OCSF standard. So that's for security data portability. So you'll see things like vulnerabilities, assets, identity, tickets, et cetera, all part of that schema. And it's the hyperscalers that are pushing it. And they got way more power than little old RegScale or even almost anybody is going to have, right? And so they're pushing that out. And so we've seen really broad adoption of that. So rather than fight the current, we built an OCSF to OSCAL translation engine. So we can take any OCSF feed, run it through our data pipelines, and normalize it into our OSCAL schema, and it feeds the process downstream. So we're doing the same thing in other places, but anywhere we can pull the data without creating snowflake factories of, I've got to build bespoke integrations to 100 things for this to work. That's one, very expensive. It'll take forever and it's going to break all the time. So where we can do things like OSCAL native or OCSF native, then it's a lot easier to support and maintain long term.
And this is one of the things that we see, and we have a bunch of our innovators on, and Paul mentioned some of the frictions in the financial institutions. We see some of the frictions within the vendor community where you have the product folks and then the customer experience folks. And I think it's very important for the financial institutions to get to know who their main point of contact within their own institution is to start to put pressure on the customer experience folks. So when we've actually been asked by certain vendors to say, hey, can you can you talk to that firm's CTO to ask our customer experience person to add this feature? Because otherwise it won't get in our development life cycle. So those are some of the things that financial institutions, to the extent they want to see things, have got to think about. To your point, the wallet,
Mhm.
there's someone that's holding the wallet at your firm. Get to know them and feed them with some of the requests and requirements so they can bring it to your customer experience representatives on the other side of the contract.
Yep. And like it's on our side, like it's like anything. It's if you're a big enough customer or there's enough demand signal. Like so it's just economics at the end of the day. And the power of CRIs, if they say we have an opinion as a community that the tooling of the future for financial services in this space needs to be able to do these things. Like here's the minimum capability set, et cetera. Industry will align to that because the market's big enough that if that's a shared voice about where the demand signal is going to be, then like we'll all skate where the puck's going, right? And so,
Mhm.
I think the basic economics of it work. It's also part of the power of having a community like CRI. Not every market we deal with organizes so well and uh, is able to speak with a voice like that. So I think that is a positive benefit of this community.
Yep. And we've got a series of questions, which is great. To kind of conclude with Matt Gallus's two or three questions. His last question is, how much manipulation of non-OSCAL data are you currently having to do in RegScale?
Um, we do, well, it's a trick. I'm going to try to answer that factually. We do very little manipulation of data in RegScale. It's all in the data pipelines that come in, which is generally via a set of APIs and an SDK. So we built a software factory to pipe data in from a bunch of different integrations. If you've got your own bespoke thing you've built for your bank, like you can use the same SDK to pipe data through at scale. But we've taken sort of a software factory SDK approach to how we do it. Others may have different approaches, but we support, I'd say 80, 90 of the most popular commercial tools out of the box. Like you just kind of turn it on. And then we can add other ones over time as we need to. But we've tried to take the top 2 to 4 in each main security category and make sure they just kind of work out of the box.
And we've got almost like a request, I think, for you to come back here, Travis. So Jeremy Zimmer asks, is it possible to see a demo in the future on how we incorporate the CRI OSCAL into our environment?
Sure.
Um, yes, right?
Hmm.
And also, is it expected that every diagnostic statement can be added into this compliance as code, even govern, for example, the function govern,
Yes.
for example, which is not necessarily a technical control and more of an administrative control?
So that the short answer is certainly yes. I've intentionally tried to make this not a sales demo. I'm a horrible sales guy anyway. I'm a nerd. I like to just kind of get into the art of the possible and engineer things. It's sort of two things. Like they've got a working group in CRI. So if you're a
Mhm.
member, you can certainly get plugged into that. We can deep dive at any time. And again, we're not the only ones doing this. There's other innovators that also have
Mhm.
cool things that they can ship.
Yep.
And I think part of what CRI brings you is a chance to get educated on the art of the possible and see it and make your own educated decisions about what may or may not work for you. But certainly we can demo that stuff. And we have 100% coverage of every mapping and every diagnostic statement into OSCAL. So from a as code ability to pull, it's all there. What I would say is there's two types of automation the way I think about it. There's traditional automation around assets, vulns, things that lend themselves to automation approaches. The big security vendors, the CrowdStrikes, the Palo Altos, those guys, they have tons of data pulling via OSCAL or OCSF, like wonderful candidate for automating that set of controls. Your question on governance is dead on. So There's a huge section, though, at least half probably, of the controls that are administrative. We think those are great chance to AI superpower your team. I don't know anybody, or at least I've not met anyone who wants AI making risk-based decisions for their financial service or their government agency. I know a lot of people though who are overdoing all the drudgery to get to the point of making the decision. So I think having that foundation, letting it analyze data, formulate it, write you a position paper, some analysis that you need for the governed step, AI can be a strong approach. I'll go back to I'm also not one of those sleazy oversellers. Like, not everything's automated and figured out, but we've never automated or figured out this much before. So I think as a function of time, these problems just get more and more solvable. But a huge chunk of those, even governed controls, are automatable today using AI approaches.
Thanks, Travis. This actually gets into kind of the next question from Amir and even Paul's statement, and it piggybacks on top of what you said, Travis, about Palo Alto having all this telemetry,
Mm-hmm.
etc. The question from Amir is, given CRI's involvement with OSCAL and RegScale's native OSCAL support, how does this standardization simplify the import, export, and exchange of the CRI profile data with other GRC tools, regulatory bodies, or third-party vendors? And this is, I think, Paul is kind of answering some of Amir's thing, and then also, I don't know if you've had separate conversations with Palo Alto, Travis, but they are developing APIs for organizations such as yours to pull in that telemetry.
Yep.
So maybe just sticking with Amir's question, if you could kind of answer that off, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's up to the GRC vendors to be able to import, export OSCAL. We do both today. We can import, we can export, we can do the full round trip. So GRC vendors have to cover their own basis, and some are leaning in, some are sort of watching from the sidelines. And so there's certainly in the market a variety of approaches and sort of hot cold of how they feel about compliance as code. Some of them just weren't built for compliance as code, though. So they're on the cold side because it's not an easy transition from them the way that they're built. We'd certainly love to work with Palo Alto or any of the others to maybe do some end-to-end proof of concepts of art of the possible, maybe in working groups or other things. So those are things we could potentially explore doing with the team. The other thing, we're talking to some of the community, maybe a bit of a teaser for the jobs one last thing. The thing we've heard is, like, on the government side, I think it's probably true on any regulatory side, they don't know quite what to do with it. Like, here's a massive JSON file, go do your audit. And they just look like, what is this? Right. So we're looking at, do we open source some tools for regulators that are free, that it doesn't matter which GRC it came out of. You could generate an OSCAL file, they could load it in a free regulatory tool, do all their work, get all their data visualization, analytics, et cetera, make it easier for them to do their job. And does that now get them more excited about it, where they start putting it in requirements documents and other things? So ideas that we are toying around in the community, foundation, other places, not to say that's the best idea, but it's an idea of like a way that you might be able to seed the market, at least seed a little demand on the regulatory side of it.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be very important for the regulatory community as well as um, I would say one of Apple's competitive advantages is how simple they make it, and you don't necessarily get to do that back end fooling around or having to translate it. So, to the extent that you are building out stuff for the regulatory community, it really is trying to create dashboards that are easy to use and are flexible for them.
Yep.
Um, in terms of CRI, this is giving me like an opportunity to talk about our vision. We came in, developed a profile in kind of that controls compliance dashboard space, right? We worked with MITRE to add the MITRE attack, so you can move now from threat to controls compliance. The next piece that we're going to be working on is actually categorizing them into various risk domains and risk statements. Because ultimately we want to go from the server room to the boardroom. We want to be your translator. But what really gets us excited is automation. And this is where the innovators come in and kind of are pushing the boundaries, like RegScale, like Palo Alto, who's on as well, and a bunch of our other innovators. And we want ultimately for your lives to be just easier through automation. So we plan on supporting other things as our members come to us and say, hey, what about this automation feature or this language? Obviously, we are very pro standardization. So what we do ask firms to do is take a look at OSCAL, take a look at OCSF and others, and start to try to pick one or two of them and not 20, because that's where, as we talked about, things start to break. The one thing that I wanted to conclude with was just that a lot of these innovators are playing nicely with each other, which is great to see. And there's this ecosystem developing around APIs. Firms push for it. Travis, I don't know if you have any kind of concluding remarks, because we're getting right toward that last minute there.
Yeah, I can't speak for all the innovators, but what I would say for me, like anyone who's working on solving this problem, it's been the bane of my existence for 25 years. And so I have respect for anyone who's putting time, money, effort, and commitment into solving it, which includes all of our competitors. I love that we're in a place as a community where there's choice and options, and competition breeds innovation. And so I think there's going to be a lot of innovative approaches that different vendors take. And it's cool to be part of that community. And we find CRI insanely valuable to us for that reason.
And I want to thank everyone staying even a minute or two after. We had tremendous attendance, and really appreciate you all coming to the session, and Travis for reaching out and saying, hey, this is part of our innovator package. We want to do this. So thanks, Travis and RegScale again.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.